actively tweaking and adjusting the game since its release. So, if the developer somehow sees this video, take my shadow suggestion with a grain of salt, as well as my complaints for level 4.
It's a vibrant, fluid, and banger-filled 2D platformer that,
I'm glad to have spent
so,
hours playing. Overall,
go ahead and join Hannah in her journey and understand.
giving
So
the
it
demo
be.
a try,
Few hours playing and replaying it,
I'll
playable
leave
demo on
the
both platforms,
page in the description.
pending
So
the
be
release.
sure to check this game out if you'd like.
Even try the demo before you buy it.
Get a $5
You should be able to get a full Subway meal for $5.
That's it.
And there's a playable demo on both platforms.
Thank all of my subscribers for your continuous
You
support.
play as Hannah,
as well as
a teenager who has been trained to participate in project. Moral Bay implements it and
Consider liking the
Project
video.
in hand is successful in stopping this event. There are speed panels and live paths that appear across. Jared had a key.
I'll do a full week
All
of
for there
uploading.
will be
And with that, my name is CrossVee, and hope to see you all next time. Love y'all. Peace. Roguelikes! A genre that we've talked about before and even covered two of my favorite games in said genre, Have a Nice Death and Deflector. I wanted to make a follow-up video to not only talk about the current state of the genre as a whole, but also talk about these games again. You see, both games have undergone many changes, and received patch after patch of bug fixes, system reworks, and of course, content. These games are quite different from the versions I previously covered on the channel, and I find it necessary to at least go back and cover what's new, essentially making an update video to the previous video I made covering these games. But when it comes to talking about each game individually, I'll spend more time focusing on all the changes and new additions, rather than spending a lot of time treading overworked ground, like development, developer history, and etc. I will briefly cover the things I've talked about before, but if you want to hear more about all of that, check out the previous video before continuing this one. I promise you, it's a banger. Now, what is the current state of the roguelike genre? So there have been quite a few games released, definitely leaving no shortage of titles in the roguelike genre, and there have been some pretty cool looking ones popping up as well. There are a few I've had my eye on, which are Astral Ascent, Nadir, Dreamscaper, and Loot River. I also have found myself watching a lot of Peglin on YouTube, another game that swiftly became quite popular for almost seamlessly combining the gameplay style of Peggle with roguelike elements. Aside from that, the roguelike scape has also seen a new style of gameplay pop up, with Vampire Survivors taking the genre by storm. This new style of roguelike shoot 'em up has seen many games enter the sphere, completely inundating the roguelike space. Brotato, 20 Minutes Till Dawn, Spellbook Demon Slayers, Soulstone Survivors, and sexy Mystic Survivors. So many developers wanted to emulate the success of Vampire Survivors while being different enough to not just be a carbon copy of their inspiration, but on the surface, besides visual style, a lot of these games seem very samey. Survive for a set amount of time, while enemies of increasing numbers and difficulty attempt to kill you. You grab XP from the enemies that die to level up, get upgrades, and just overall get stronger to aid in your end goal of surviving. This seems to be consistent across majority of these games. Not to say that they don't throw in other modes or objectives, but this seems to be the baseline, with the least successful ones not adding anything extra or new, or just not being visually distinct enough from the others. Because of this, I personally had zero interest in these sorts of games, and really couldn't understand their appeal. Eventually giving in, I bought 20 Minutes Till Dawn, Spellbook Demon Slayers, and Vampire Survivors to get a decent sampling of the genre, and to my surprise, after spending a few hours with each, I've been having a lot of fun with them. The gameplay across them all is simple enough to just pick up and play, and with enough difficulty and variety in the weapons and characters to provide replayability, it can get quite addictive. And since they already have roguelike elements, as they give you a random set of upgrades to choose from each time you level up, there's always a reason to try again when you fail. Long story short, I get the appeal now, but I don't really want to explore this budding subgenre much further, but who knows, that might change in the future. With a lot of the roguelike shoot-em-ups having rather low price tags, I can't deny that the low barrier of entry isn't enticing to at least try. And with this subgenre becoming so popular so fast, there's obviously something quite enticing there. But this video isn't solely for talking about the state of the roguelike genre, but if you do want a full video talking about all that, then let me know down in the comments. So, let's go ahead and jump into covering Have a Nice Death. Hey little guy, do you know where the subscribe button is? Oh, thank you. Since we last talked about Have a Nice Death, there have been new levels, new bosses, new weapons, magic, systems, visual updates, endgame, and more changes. So many changes. And even in the middle of making this video, the game got its final major update before its full 1.0 release, which is why I delayed this video from its original release date. This also means I'll be using a mixture of pre and post final update footage, but they won't be too distinguishable from each other. Since there's a lot to unpack, let's start with a quick recap for those who don't know what Have a Nice Death is. Have a Nice Death is a 2D action roguelike developed by Magic Design Studios. You play as Death, traveling through Death Inc. to regain control of your rebelling department heads and their lackeys. You'll travel from location to location, room after room, grabbing souls, upgrades, weapons, and magic, employing any means necessary to get you ever closer to your vacation time off. Got it?
Got it.
So with that out of the way, what of the changes? Aside from the slew of visual updates and quality of life adjustments, I guess we'll start from the beginning of your run, which is also technically the ending or endgame or breakdown. Before starting your run, you'll pass up a board in which you'll be able to adjust the current breakdown level, which acts as a sort of difficulty modifier. You'll start off with only the base difficulty, and every time you complete a run, you'll unlock the next breakdown level, all the way up to breakdown 15. And in this new update, they even added a breakdown level that acts as an easy mode, or sort of peaceful mode for beginners. After you've selected your breakdown level, signed your challenge contracts, and begun the run, you'll get a chance to choose to swap out your basic scythe for one of two other random options. Previously, you'd only be able to unlock other scythe weapons from Jacob with the premium currency that you would find during your runs. But with this update, it allows the player to start off with a different scythe each time, rather than the basic starter scythe from before. You can still use your premium to evolve and upgrade your scythes with Jacob though. Speaking of scythes, there have also been some new additions to Death's arsenal as well. New scythes, new magical spells, and new cloak attacks. And what are you gonna do with this ever-growing arsenal? You're gonna go out there and whip your employees into shape. These sorrows have gone too far, and it's time to start cracking down. And since we last talked, they've grown their ranks with two new sorrows with their own new departments, enemies, and thanagers. First up, we have the Sorrow Waldo, a killer animatronic robot who is the head of the toxic food processing department, which has appropriately themed enemies like massive cheeseburgers, bubblegum cannon looking motherfuckers, and French fry. The department itself is covered in vats of burning melted cheese, massive piles of junk food and fast food signs bask in an almost sickly yellow. There are also two thanagers in this department, P. Gorse and Candace.
Who's Candace?
Candace was originally the Thanager from the Addictions Department, but was probably moved here due to her fitting in better with her food theming. Then there is Catherine Imamura, a typhoon of a woman who is the head of the Natural Disaster Department, and currently stands as the last sorrow you'll face in this current version. The enemies and design of this level, as you've probably guessed, are themed around natural disasters. You'll be slaying thunder clouds, drowning people, burning trees, and people just straight up engulfed in flames. You'll be doing all of this while twisters and flames rage on in the background. Her Thanager H. Sinistrosaurus is a massive thundercloud that will spark and shock you into your next run if you aren't careful. Both sorrows and departments are fantastic additions, and I have to say that the Natural Disaster Department has easily become my new favorite, with its clever and cool enemy designs to its difficult but fun sorrow boss fight. Its backing track is also pretty clean. Have a listen. Aside from the new departments being added, there's been a change to how you'll be traversing between each department during your runs. Once you've slain a sorrow and gone through the break room, you'll find yourself with a choice of two different departments to go to next. These options don't really shuffle around, so they'll be the same every time you go through. Once you beat the first level, you'll get to choose between the toxic food processing department and the industrial pollution department, and after beating one of those, you'll get to choose between the physical illness department or the addictions department. Afterwards, you only get one choice going forward, with the modern warfare department and the natural disaster department following after. This does mean you won't go through certain departments during your runs, like the previous version of the game, but I don't think this detracts from the overall experience. And I also think that there may even be more departments in the future, based on the fact that choices seemingly stop altogether once you reach the modern warfare departments, but to be honest, I'm not quite sure. Moving on, once you defeat Miss Catherine Imamura, or die on the way there, you'll be treated to a new progression system. Before, you'd just be unlocking new items and weapons with the gold bars from each of your runs, which is something that's still here, but now you have levels that grant you more bonuses based on your level. Things such as bonus starting anima, cursory rolls, or even the newly added boss elevator system. At certain levels, you will unlock an elevator at the beginning of your run that will take you straight to a specific boss. You basically use these to skip the filler or just practice fighting a boss that you've been struggling with. You're only as strong as you are when entering the elevator, so you won't have the upgrades and weapons you usually have when facing these bosses. There are the items you get from your levels and contracts, but that's pretty much it. I guess the boss elevators kind of just act as a sort of checkpoint for you to jump ahead in the run. Besides this, there have been a few festive updates with decorations and holiday-themed dialogue, as well as a slew of quality of life changes and balancing. There are now hidden rooms that open when you use an anima next to it, a training room in which you can test out different weapons, an area to see your previous run data, and new floors that can appear during runs, such as the anima floors, challenge floors, item floors, and even the occasional relaxation floor. The previous issue of anima being too plentiful feels like it's been adjusted nicely to be a decent amount. Lifesteal has been nerfed to a great degree, making it more balanced and a lifesaver at times. There's tons of other adjustments to numbers and the like, but these have been the major additions and changes across the board. Have a Nice Death is currently sitting in a great state with plenty of content and progression from when I first talked about it. I can't wait for its 1.0 release, and I'll definitely be playing that update when it comes out. I just hope that I can get good and finally make it past Breakdown Level 2 before that. But just like before, this is a double feature, so let's go ahead and jump straight into Deflector. For those unaware, Deflector is a bullet hell roguelike that is being developed by Aerofist Games, an indie studio based out in Barcelona. And before we jump in, I just want to give a massive shout out to the developers, who are genuinely some of the best I've seen around when it comes to not only being a part of their community, but actively listening to us as well. It feels as though every suggestion, complaint, and criticism doesn't fall on deaf ears, as every piece of feedback is at least heard and considered. They've been transparent with changes and plans for the future of Deflector, and it feels like they genuinely not only care about delivering the best game they can, but care about their community and what they want as well. Thank you Aerofist for producing one of my favorite games of this year, and thank you so much for being such based as hell devs. Now moving on. The last we talked about Deflector, it was still in early access, like it is now, but was substantially different than it is currently. Of course, new content has been added, but there's been many system reworks, balances, visual updates, and quality of life changes too. Some of which were even suggestions and hopes from my previous video, which is awesome. And since I've been able to watch my friend play a bit for his first time, I've also been able to even take a look at the first time player experience with this current version of the game. So let's start off with one of the changes you'll probably notice from the start. And we'll skip the characters for now, as I'll cover all of their changes and additions later on. So firstly, the hub has changed, specifically when it comes to the area when unlocking mutations. In the version of the game we covered before, you would be able to use your DNA points to buy permanent upgrades for future runs and discover new neutral mutations. But this has been changed, so you'll only be using DNA points to get permanent upgrades. The new way for unlocking new neutral mutations is tied to a new level progression system that you'll slowly gain levels in over the course of your playtime. Every time you level up, a new neutral mutation will be unlocked and can now be discovered during your runs. And we've gotten some great additions to the list of mutations this time around, such as missiles firing off every time you use your active ability, killing an enemy refreshing one of your dash charges, and even a little drone that has a chance to heal you when you get damaged. All of these and all other neutral mutations can be viewed here at the Collector's Laboratory as you unlock them. Those of you who did watch my previous video on Deflector may also remember that I didn't like how this feature of the game was locked behind an optional quest. A feature as important as this in a roguelike should be available to the player pretty much from the start, and it seems that the devs possibly agree with me on this, as it's been changed to be exactly that. This change could have also been made due to the removal of optional quests, but I'd like to think that this change was made for the former though. Moving forward, let's talk about more of the core gameplay changes and additions. Firstly, we have a new world. The Hollow Hive has arrived with new mobs, a new boss, and a very welcome theme. Have a listen to the new track. Easily number 2 of my favorite tracks, right under the magnetic fields. New world aside, there's been quite a few changes when it comes to the world map, specifically with the locations you'll be going to. There are the red mutation spots that once clearing will give you a new neutral mutation. The timer spots are timed locations with a unique map that you have to survive on, but once completing will give you an upgrade point for your mutations. There's also the generic cell spots, which will just provide a bonus of cells for clearing them. There's also of course the boss spot, where you'll fight the boss at the end of each map. And then there's the purple mid-boss spot, which is a new addition to the game. Each world has a mid-boss that you'll eventually challenge. There's the obelisk in the magnetic fields, the Bastion twins returning from their optional fight in the living entrails, the massive spider in the hollow hive, and the newly reworked serpent returning to the toxic sea. Very quickly, I'll say that the new serpent fight is miles better than its previous version that I'd complained about in my previous video, and I'm so happy to see it in a much better state. In the Discord, there do seem to be a few people who still aren't a fan of it, but I feel like this is mostly in comparison to the other mid-bosses, which carry more of a challenge and are a bit more unique. But I personally am just glad to see it just be a better boss than it previously was. Changing over, let's get back to talking about the map. Lastly, there are the yellow spots that will provide you with an upgrade point to your attributes, which is how I'm going to segue to talking about the newly revamped run progression, the DNA board. Last time we had talked about Deflector, the game utilized a branching DNA table that you'd place your neutral mutations on to access traits to make yourself stronger with more buffs and elemental effects. This has been reworked into a more streamlined system in the DNA board, which limits the amount of mutations you can have up to 7, attaches elemental properties to each neutral mutation with stacking bonuses based on how many of a single element you have, and makes your attack, deflecting damage, and health scale independently of your neutral mutations. I know that was a lot, so let's break this down. To preface this, although I do miss the old DNA table as it was so unique, the DNA board is objectively better in pretty much every way when comparing the two. The DNA board does limit the amount of neutral mutations you can hold, making you have to actually consider which ones you want to take in your run, especially since they can be individually leveled to become stronger. Each one also carries a random elemental property, making you even consider the possibility of stacking up a single one to access some elemental effects. Their elemental property can be changed in the hub between worlds once you unlock this feature, but it does cost a hefty amount of cells to do so. Cells that you could be using in the shop for more health, new neutral mutations, or even just upgrades to your attributes. Then, on the DNA board, we have the attribute system, which was a sort of hidden value accessible by traits in the old DNA table, but they have been reworked in this newer version. As mentioned before, your attributes will be increasing based on how many points you put into each during a run, specifically getting them from shops or completing one of the previously mentioned upgrade spots on the map. Putting a point in one of these attributes will increase it by a small percentage, incentivizing you to grab any when you can to give you that extra boost in scaling stats. But, depending on the mutations you have or hope on getting, you may want to focus down a certain attribute over another. For example, this mutation I currently have deals damage based on my attack attribute, so the higher my attack attribute, the more damage this neutral mutation will wind up doing. And this extends to pretty much most of the damage-based neutral mutations. Some characters may even want to focus one stat over the other, depending on how you want to play them, and of course the build you're going for. Then there are these two other sections towards the bottom, titled Nucleolus and Evolution. Nucleolus is where you'll get to put your boss mutation, upgrading as you defeat other bosses, or swapping it out with a new one when you get the choice. Evolution, on the other hand, is where you'll put class-specific mutations after defeating a world's mid-boss. And finally, I think it's time to start talking about the characters and their changes. For those who aren't aware, the available characters are the Eradicator, the Slasher, the Spark, the Gunslinger, and the newly added Light Fist. Each carry their own unique mechanics, playstyle, and evolution mutations. There was also the removal of the Alpha, Beta, and Gamma forms across the board, but the evolution mutations greatly make up for that in my opinion. So let's start off with the face of the game and the character you'll start off with, the Eradicator. The Eradicator is pretty much unchanged, and still remains a fun classic for doing runs with. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The only real change are its evolution mutations, which range from having your boomerang grow in size every time you deflect it, to increase damage to your next boomerang immediately after dashing. Next is the Slasher, who's received some big changes. The Slashers receive some extra range, slower attack speed, a rework to its sword throw, a new deflect, and a new rage mechanic. When hitting enemies, the Slasher will build rage, empowering its next sword throw or radial slash, its new deflect, with more damage based on the amount of rage built up. Without rage, both of these do little to no damage, so the rage mechanic is almost necessary for you to pump out damage. I was never a huge fan of Slasher, but for me, these changes push him in the right direction, but it still feels like he's a bit off. He feels a little disjointed. And based on some Slasher enjoyers' reactions in the Discord, I'd say I'm not the only one. So I tried to do a little brainstorming to figure out what he could be. I feel as though some things didn't need changes. So reverting his attack speed, attaching his sword throw back to his primary, and reverting his deflect would give him some good. Leave his rage mechanic, and let it build continuously. So when at max rage, deflecting will instead become his radial slash, consuming all rage to do a large amount of damage in an area around the Slasher, as well as deflecting any bullets around him. If the player deflects before reaching max rage, it'll just be his regular deflect. But the player can choose to use what rage they built up to give more damage to his sword throw, which I do think should still have low base damage. If I'm correct, I believe the developers' reasoning for changing how his sword throw works ties in how they wanted the Slasher to be more melee focused, and I kind of agree with the sentiment, but having it do pretty much 0 damage feels a bit much. I feel these changes could give Slasher some better cohesion within his kit, but for those who actually play Slasher, what do you want to see done with the character? Let me know down in the comments. I'll be down there and look forward to seeing what you all have to say. Rework aside, his evolution mutations range from summoning a massive sword to strike the ground on your third attack, to radial slash releasing a massive wave that deals damage when using it at max rage. Up next is Spark, who's also received quite a few changes since we last talked about her. Spark works relatively the same as before, as you'll be deflecting the orbs orbiting you to deal damage, and you'll be calling them back to do even more damage as they pass through enemies. Also learned you could just hold left click to make them orbit you faster and deal damage that way, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure if that was a thing before her changes. She's also received a new active ability in which she fires a massive beam of lightning, damaging all enemies in its path. There was a brief stint where her active ability made her intangible during this duration, but I'm glad this change was made, as this kind of just made her busted, since she pretty much has her active up all the time. Her evolution mutations range from having orbs explode instead of her calling back to her, to adding 2 more orbs to her orbit. And last of the original cast is the Gunslinger, who I originally didn't really like because of how strong and easy they were, and I personally had no fun with him. Although he's received some much deserved nerfs and changes, I still find him to be the easiest of the bunch. But at least he now has some added risk and difficulty when compared to his previous versions. The Gunslinger is still the safest of the group. Spark is a close second in my opinion, as the Gunslinger has the most range, but he does have the lowest dash count, base damage, and max health of the cast. This in my opinion doesn't hold much weight, as by the time this matters, the Gunslinger has typically scaled up already. All that really isn't an issue though, it's just more of an observation of mine. Now, with the Gunslinger's changes, he has a new deflect, a reworked active ability, and even some changes to his primary fire as well. You no longer have a meter that determines your fire rate. Now it's consistent until you utilize your new deflect ability, which projects a wall in front of you, lowering your movement speed and fire rate while it's active. The active ability of the Gunslinger now allows you to place 3 smaller turrets when active. They don't seem as strong as the original single turret until later in the game, and after several upgrades, where I'd still shred bosses like Swiss cheese. Its evolution mutations range from having your primary become a triple shot, to having turrets project an aura that lowers the damage you take, and raises the damage you deal while you stand in it. Next up is the newest addition to the cast, and my current favorite of all of the available characters, the Light Fist. I love the Light Fist, and she's a welcome addition to the cast with her unique gameplay style, and honestly added difficulty of piloting efficiency. She doesn't have the greatest range when compared to the other characters, no multi-hitting attacks without mutations or active ability, which isn't always readily available to you, and has relatively lower base damage when compared to the rest of the cast, minus Gunslinger. Though with her drawbacks, she is absolutely able to pump out massive amounts of damage in a short amount of time with her marks, and can easily clear space for herself with her deflect ability. She's a blast to play, but genuinely feels difficult to play effectively, as it kind of feels like you have to work a bit harder than the other classes to get things rolling. With her primary attack, she'll strike forward with her fist, dealing damage to the first target hit. Her deflect is a short punch that can be charged up to send enemies and bullets flying away from you, and it even has the ability to knock enemies into terrain and deal damage when it's at max charge. Hitting an enemy with your deflect or deflected bullets will mark them, making your next 3 attacks deal more damage. Her active ability marks all enemies alive in the room and changes her basic attack to be a large AoE slam that consumes all marks on a hit target, dealing massive damage in a single strike. Her evolution mutations range from having her primary attack now go through enemies and reach further, to granting an AoE slam to her next attack immediately after dashing. And with one of these characters, you'll be pushing non-linearly through 3 worlds of your choice to reach the newly reworked final boss, the Source. With a new coat of visual paint and reworked mechanics, this final boss, although feeling a bit easier than before, holds up when it comes to its design. Defeat increasing number of eyeball enemies while dodging attacks that can change color at any moment to open up the eye in the center of the room, or you'll get a chance to deal damage to the boss. As said before, this boss isn't as difficult as the teleporting nightmare that its original version could be, but I can't say that I don't enjoy its newer version a bit more personally. But this easy talk may change with some of the difficulty in endgame additions coming soon. As you've probably guessed, Deflector isn't done just yet, as more content and adjustments are still on the way. We are getting one more character, as well as a bunch of other things sometime in Q1 of this year, and I'm excited to see what they cook up. I'm excited that we're getting new endgame features, providing more replayability to the game once you've already unlocked everything, and are looking for more of a challenge. We've already gotten a few explanations and some teasers on how these endgame changes will work in the game's Discord, which I'll be leaving in the description so you can get involved with the community. Overall, the changes the game has received since my previous video, and the changes on the horizon, show so much amazing promise for it, and it's a shame that so little people know about it. I love Deflector, and it's no wonder that this game made my top 3 for my personal top games of 2022 list. This would probably be the time where I'd recommend one of the game's demos, Specimen 0 and Specimen 1, but these have since been taken down for no longer being representative of the game Deflector currently is, and there may or may not be a new demo in the future once the game fully releases out of early access. And that's it. Both of these games are fantastic in their own right and deserve so much love. I'll be leaving links to both game Steam pages in the description, so check them out if either of them interests you. And as usual, my name is Alrighty, the Lunasis video is finally done and dusted. What's up next on the schedule?
You have a new roguelike video to do.
Oh yeah, the one covering the updates for Have a Nice Death and Deflector.
Correct. Shall I pull up your script for the video?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll start getting things together. Something's off here.
You are correct. I have data logged of us almost completing the roguelike video.
I think I also kind of remember that. No, I'm feeling it too.
Running history check.
What do you think's going on?
Scan complete. At 5 p.m. we started setting up and recording for the new roguelike video. At 5:25 p.m., we began recording the outro for said video. Then at 5 p.m. we started setting up and recording for the new roguelike video. At 5:01 p.m., we began this conversation.
Wait, so we'd started making the video all over again? Then that means...
Time has been reset by 25 minutes. Now that you mention it, neither can I.
So, we can't even rift to another universe? There's a barrier. Who would trap us in our own apartments? Why would they want us not going anywhere?
They've left us with no ability to rift into other universes, trapping us in a specific location within our home universe, doing so by entrapping us in a seemingly unbreakable time loop.
The Council.